Tonight on Politicat, Anyone's Game, we break down the 14-way race for Chicago mayor.
Bernie's back. Senator Sanders enters the Democratic race for president.
And Final Frontier, the president launches the Space Force.
We'll have all that and more on Politicat. It's your politics right now. Good evening and welcome to Politicat. I'm Joey Safchik.
And I'm Justin Sweetwood. Let's get right into it. A new chapter is unfolded in the Jussie Smollett case as the Empire actor appeared in court today to be presented with a charge of disorderly conduct for filing a false police report. In January, Smollett alleged that he was the victim of a racially motivated and homophobic assault in downtown Chicago. But new details emerged last week when the two men suspected of perpetrating the attack were found to have been connected to Smollett and said that he paid them to stage the attack. The actor was released today on $100,000 bond.
A landmark Supreme Court ruling was handed down yesterday in the case of Timms v. Indiana. The highest court in the land ruled unanimously to place limits on a practice known as civil asset forfeiture, in which states can confiscate money and property that were used to commit crimes. The court says that such seizures of property violates the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits excessive fines.
Senate and House Democrats are planning to introduce resolutions to block President Trump's national emergency declaration. Last Friday, the president declared a national emergency in order to access billions of dollars in funding with which he plans to build a wall on the nation's southern border with Mexico. This news comes after 16 states filed a lawsuit claiming that the president illegally bypassed Congress to build the wall.
In 5 days, Chicago voters will seek to elect a new mayor. The crowded field of 14 candidates includes business leaders, aldermen, and representatives. Multiple candidates represent possible firsts for the city, including the city's first potential Latina mayor or first potential lesbian mayor. In such a full arena, some candidates have struggled to distinguish themselves, and what happens on Tuesday has been difficult to predict. Cook County Board President Toni Preckwinkle currently holds the lead in the race. Polling places her with 13% of the vote. Now we have Katie Henderson here from the Daily Northwestern. Is this a lead that could in any way predict the results on Tuesday?
Honestly, Joey, it's really too soon to know. There are 14 candidates, and in this runoff, or in this initial election, a candidate needs to receive a majority of the vote. 13% is obviously nowhere near enough to guarantee that she will win this race. According to recent polling from the Chicago Sun-Times, 1 in 4 voters is still undecided. And so at this point, that is obviously 25%. That's more than the lead that she has. And so it could really easily change next week. So she should not be sitting comfortably right now.
The role of function of the Chicago Police Department has been a hot topic of conversation in the race. Lori Lightfoot has been a vocal critic of the CPD and was the chair of the Chicago Police Accountability Task Force. John Kolsar wants to establish a live-in requirement for police officers, and former CPD Superintendent Gary McCarthy is running on his plans to improve Chicago policing. Is this an issue that you think is resonating with voters?
Oh, certainly. I think policing is one of the most hot-button issues in this election. You see a lot of candidates who have made a name for themselves in the Chicago Police Department, in police reform. Lori Lightfoot herself is serving on this board. Gary McCarthy is infamous for leading the Chicago Police Department during the murder of Laquan McDonald. And over the past 6 months, with the sentencing and the indictment of Jason Van Dyke, there are many citizens who are very upset and very worried about what the Chicago Police Department looks like. You have community organizations like No Cop Academy and Erase the Database that are making significant headway in their movements. Erase the Database just had a really big victory yesterday, where they were able to secure support for their goal. And I think as we see this conversation continue, I think that in this election and in the next 10 years in Chicago, policing in Chicago is going to be absolutely essential, and hopefully we'll see some changes.
So one of the most stunning aspects of this race is the fact that there are 14 candidates and no one with a clear lead. But what are the policy issues that these candidates are running on, which should voters be aware of?
I mean, as I just mentioned, policing is definitely a huge part of the discussion. Education is also very important. in the past, under Mayor Rahm Emanuel, there were a record number of school closures in Chicago, which has certainly a lot of Chicagoans very concerned. And as far as education, there's also a movement to make the Chicago School Board an elected body. At this point, they're appointed by the mayor, and many progressive candidates are running on these platforms. And then you see other candidates who are also from the education establishment, like Paul Vallis.
Why do you think that the field to replace Rahm Emanuel is so crowded?
I mean, I think politics are changing a lot in Chicago. They're changing a lot in the United States. I think the Chicago political machine has been so criticized under Rahm Emanuel and under both of the daily mayors. I think that Chicago is really looking for a change. I think people are stepping up from everywhere. And I think it's also indicative of a larger movement in American politics where people are tired of the elite political actors that we've seen for so long.
Is this going to lead to a runoff?
Most certainly. I think it's highly unlikely that a candidate receives 50% of the vote next week, and I think that we will see two candidates advance in April.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine Henderson. We'll have to leave it there. We'll be right back.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Go Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. At Northwestern University, the possibilities are endless.
Welcome back to Politicat. This week, millions of Americans have been feeling the burn, and we're taking a look at early 2020 campaign contributions in this week's Money Minute. At a ripe 77 years old, Bernie Sanders is thinking that the second time might be the charm. The Vermont senator and 2016 presidential candidate announced on Tuesday that he's throwing his hat back into the ring. Within 24 hours, he raised a historic $6 million for his campaign from nearly 250,000 donors. That's more than $25 per person. This is quadruple the $1.5 million total he raised in the first 24 hours of his campaign back in 2015, and also 4 times more than Kamala Harris raised in the first day after she announced her bid. Amy Klobuchar raised $1 million, while Elizabeth Warren took in nearly $300,000. But let's not kid ourselves. It takes a lot more than $6 million to run a successful campaign. Bernie raised over $200 million in the 2016 election and still lost the nomination. But still, what makes Bernie so unique in his ability to attract millions of small donors? More than 2 million people have donated to him since 2012 through Act Blue, the Democratic fundraising platform. Beto O'Rourke is next with just under 750,000 donors. The elephant in the room remains this: can Sanders turn these promising numbers into actual votes? That's this week's Money Minute. Let's go back to the desk.
Thanks, Justin. Now let's welcome our panel to talk more about Bernie's 2020 prospects. We have NNN politics reporter Amanda Rooker and NU College Republicans Jose Trejos. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, Amanda, we'll start with you. Now, is there anything to make of that $6 million donation that Bernie received?
Yeah, I think that you can just tell by all the headlines that's a pretty incredible sum that he raised. I was just reading an article. I think it says that was actually 4 times the amount that he raised his first day. That was $1.5 million on the first day. So that is incredible, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot of the headlines. But when you really think about it, I mean, comparatively to the other candidates that are running, he has the biggest name brand. He already has such a large base. So it does make sense that people are donating these small amounts to him just because he has such a big name brand already.
Yes, I think it's actually very interesting because Bernie Sanders, he made his name of being an anti-establishment candidate, but in a sense it shows that he's become the establishment. The fact is that right now he's actually not saying things that are that far to the left of his other candidates, Elizabeth Warren and other people in the race, and they are about as left-wing as he is. But he is the one that gets more money than, I think, close to the rest of them combined, mostly because of his recognition and the fact that he has an establishment he built in 2016.
Yeah, but I think maybe that might be because he was so successful in his 2016 campaign. People saw that anti-establishment base and campaign was so successful that now there are so many people running on that same type of platform that that is why. And so it might not necessarily be that he's so establishment, especially because that $6 million with his anti-wealth campaign is so striking. But when you look and see that it's an average of a $27 donation, that is what's truly incredible, that it isn't as establishment as it comes across.
Let's talk more about how his standpoint contrasts with his fellow 2020 candidates. What do you think will set him apart for good or for bad?
I think that's the difficult thing. In 2016, it was almost a laughingstock that he was saying he wasn't going to take any donations from these PACs. He was running on this anti-wealth socialist campaign. People were laughing, and then all of a sudden he was so successful. And so now it's not so surprising that we're seeing so many candidates saying, yes, Medicare for all, yes, free college, public tuition. I think that's going to be difficult for him because that was his thing in 2016, and now he has to kind of combat that, as well as the fact that he has to figure out how to campaign to younger voters, campaign to racial politics, and figure out that. I think it might be a little difficult for him.
Yes, I think I would agree with most of your points there. Bernie Sanders, during his last campaign, he struggled a lot to connect with African Americans. That was really hurt him in the primary. And he struggled to, well, in part to connect to women because he was running against what could have been the first woman president, but in general, his voter base does skew towards the white male, and that seems to be something he's fighting very aggressively during this campaign. He's already making statements against accusations of sexual harassment in his original campaign. He's making all these strong statements trying to appeal to those groups that didn't resonate with him originally. So it seems that he's learning from the mistakes that he made in the first time around. So, I mean, regardless of whether you support him or not, it seems like he's taking that direction.
So something very interesting has happened since the 2016 election. When Trump took office, there's almost a shift in the direction the Democratic Party was headed down. Has it come to a point where a self-described socialist could legitimately be elected president of the United States?
Well, in my personal view, that is only because they'll be running against Donald Trump. It's a lot easier to win by being very hard to the left when you're trying to win a Democratic primary where only the 10% most liberal voters in the country are going to vote compared to the general election. But it is true that it is remarkable how candidates that are considered to be on the center of the Democratic Party, like Kamala Harris, all these type of establishment candidates, they're taking positions calling for the abolition of private health care for all and for all these positions that Bernie Sanders himself said. 2 years ago when I was calling these things, they called me crazy. Now all of you are saying this.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see if centrists candidates do gain success and have a chance of being successful. Especially, I think you're absolutely right in the fact that Trump and the polarization around Trump has all of a sudden caused this mad race for who can be the most to the left. And it'll be interesting to see if John Delaney, centrist candidate, has any validity to his campaign. But yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see for sure. Yeah.
At the same time, although I do see a lot of Democrats cheering that the Democrats are moving to the left when they're probably going to beat Trump, and I do agree they're probably going to beat Trump. I do think it's worth being concerned that maybe this is the way that they managed to lose Trump. I'm not sure that left-wingers should be entirely cheering this.
Do Republican challengers to Trump actually stand a chance in 2020?
I don't think so. Donald Trump, the thing about his followers is that they're very loyalistic, and the Republicans do have a tendency that we tend to fall in line once we see that kind of thing. Like especially when we see Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, they're taking positions that, from a Republican standpoint, would be called communist or hardline socialist. And when that is the alternative, it is very hard for Republicans, even those that are disgusted with Trump's transphobic or sexist or other behaviors, it's very hard to vote for someone that he believes is going to take the country in that direction when that is the antithesis of your other beliefs.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree. I think that definitely, I don't know, I think that Trump will probably get the nomination, but I think what's going to be really difficult is then if you have these really left-wing candidates earning the Democratic primary or winning the Democratic primary, earning that nomination, how are they going to appeal to the Trump voters? How are they going to appeal to that base? Because that will leave a lot of independent voters, a lot of moderate conservatives, moderate Democrats. Where will they end up? Who will they vote for? I think that could end up being a key issue that needs to be addressed.
What kind of candidate from the Democratic Party do you think stands the best chance against Donald Trump? Because a lot of people are talking, you don't necessarily need the most presidential candidate, you need the candidate that can beat Donald Trump.
I think that's a great question. I think that if Biden ends up running, that there's a lot of speculation around that and around his base and everything that he said. I think he could potentially stand a good chance against Trump. I think Elizabeth Warren there's a lot of interest around her campaign. Obviously, with the big push for women in Congress that we've just seen, I think having a female candidate is a really big deal that a lot of people are looking for. So I think Elizabeth Warren could definitely challenge Trump, especially with a lot of Trump's really sexist comments that he's made. Looking for that diversity in the White House could be something that a lot of people would appreciate.
Is there anyone that stands out for you, Jose?
Biden, or if not Biden, then anyone who doesn't particularly stick out. I think that the more the election is about Donald Trump, the more Trump is doomed. And it is only by casting the Democrats as being out of touch, only by casting the Democrats as being far left, that Trump is going to have any chance.
All right, thanks so much. We're taking a short break. We'll be right back.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Go Northwestern, break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all the go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
We know the news can be a little overwhelming, so we're going to catch you up on a few stories you might have missed. First, a newspaper editor in Alabama encouraged the return of the KKK in an editorial last week. Goodloe Sutton, the editor of the Democratic Reporter, called for the Ku Klux Klan to, quote, clean out Washington. Sutton added the KKK, quote, didn't kill but a few people. After the comments, he was removed from the Hall of Fame at the University of Southern Mississippi, his alma mater.
The Trump administration is reportedly planning to announce a global campaign to end the criminalization of homosexuality. U.S. German Ambassador Richard Grenell, who is openly gay himself, is reportedly leading the campaign as part of an effort to further isolate Iran over its human rights record. The details of the measure are still being worked out, but when asked about the reports, President Trump appeared unaware of the potential campaign.
It's one of the most iconic photographs in American history. A sailor embraces and kisses a woman in Times Square after America declared victory over Japan, marking the end of World War II. Earlier this week, George Mendoza, the man identified as the elated soldier, has died. He was 95. The day after he died, a Florida statue depicting the famous photo was vandalized with #MeToo spray painted on the woman's leg. In 2014, an article was published in Time saying for some, this photo is a representation of sexual assault, not jubilation.
Yesterday, the Australian government declared the Bramble-Cay malamus, a type of rat, extinct, making it the first mammal to go extinct due to climate change. Scientists cited high water levels and storm surges that led to the habitat and food source destruction as reasons for its extinction. Australia currently has the third highest extinction rate in the world, and scientists warn that while the rat may be the first mammal to go, it probably won't be the last. And with that, we're going to welcome him back in our panel for Politicat, where we talk about politics stories taking social media by storm. On Tuesday, President Trump signed Space Policy Directive 4, which would establish the Space Force as the sixth military branch after some time as a subgroup of the Air Force. The Space Force is intended to extend American military dominance into space, playing catch-up with countries like China and Russia. The directive is temporary, but in order to actually establish the Space Force as a separate military branch, the president eventually would need congressional approval. Is this something Congress is likely to sign off on, Amanda?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, this is not going to be something that's needed because aliens are going to attack Manhattan, you know. I think it's could be an actual legitimate thing just because you said catching up to China, catching up to Russia, there are these adversary satellites that we could potentially need to destroy. I think the real caveat here is that there's already been so much military spending, trying to convince Congress that we need more military spending. It will just be how much do we really need to play catch up with China and Russia.
Yes, I would agree. This isn't really the kind of issue that ends up being played for politics. It's going to be more whether the fact that Democrats don't like military spending in general. But if this is justified, and it might be out of space, involving the military in space is something of a new field that's growing. The possibility of new threats from there is something that it's still like somewhat in the future, but it's not as crazy as it was when Nixon got lambasted for it back in the 70s. And if it is something that is needed, then hopefully it's going to be investigated.
So is the Space Force something that's really military a necessity?
I mean, it depends on a lot of the. So back, I remember back when World War back when World War II started, most of the countries were investing heavily on naval forces and land forces because in World War I, air forces were something of a distraction. They were used for scouting, they were used for big spectacular dogfights, but they didn't really win any battles. And then World War II ended up being entirely about air forces, like entirely about air forces. The possibility that could happen with the Space Force in the future is something that shouldn't be discounted, especially when it's the woman just investigating into it.
Absolutely. I think that's the field that we're going to continue to explore, and I think within a couple of years it could be something that's a lot more real than the craziness that we currently think that it is.
Okay, we're going to move into our next Politicat. So there's a little barbershop in Hanoi, Vietnam, where hairdressers are offering free haircuts when people ask to look like President Donald Trump or North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Trump and Kim will meet in Vietnam next week for their second summit. So I don't know if you've had a chance to see the pictures. We can't show you the pictures at home because they're copyrighted. You can definitely Google them. What do you think of this? These two men are quite revered in Vietnam, it seems.
Man, I think that it just goes to show how what celebrities these political leaders can come to be. I think when you start seeing Halloween masks, you start seeing, Jimmy Fallon playing, different presidential candidates and presidents and leaders on SNL. That's the time when you get things like this happening, giving free haircuts to look like Donald Trump in other countries. I think it goes to show what mockery and what fun is being made of these leaders that are now in our country and in North Korea.
So many of the people asking for these haircuts have actually stated that they really respect these two leaders, including children. What do you make of that?
I think it's really funny that communist leader and Donald Trump, who is the Republican president, are being compared. I think it's really funny because it shows that to so many people throughout the world who don't follow American politics at all, like in Vietnam, if you're in Vietnam, like you probably don't follow American politics literally at all. There is no context for Donald Trump. Like in Donald Trump, we associate him with sexism, we associate him with all the scandals, we associate him with being a Republican president. To them, it's nothing. Trump is just a businessman who is rich and became very successful, and that identity he has kept it entirely. And it's very interesting to see how that can happen in international context.
Okay, thank you so much to our panel for joining us. We'll be back with more Politicat.
At Northwestern, we're wildcats in every way.
right through that. Ah, with our colors flying, we will cheer you all the go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
At Northwestern University, we are pioneering innovation and achieving excellence across every imaginable discipline. At Northwestern University, the possibilities are endless.
Nick Sandmann. If you don't know his name, you know his face, and that's part of the reason why his parents say they're suing the Washington Post after it reported on a video which shows him in confrontation with a Native American activist on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Sandmann's parents are asking for compensation and damages to the tune of $250 million, the same amount Jeff Bezos paid when he bought the Post in 2013. The suit calls the Post an aggressive bully with a bully pulpit and said they targeted Sandmann because he was a white Catholic student. His parents seek to punish, deter, and teach the Post a lesson it will never forget, the suit says. When the teenager was caught on camera last month smirking in front of Nathan Phillips, news outlets and social media users quickly tore into Sandmann and his classmates from Covington Catholic High School, saying they were mocking Phillips and comparing the boys to white aggressors in the civil rights era. But once other videos of the incident surfaced online, it became unclear which of the three protesting groups, the March for Life, the Indigenous Peoples March, and the Black Hebrew Israelites, started the confrontation. Now, Sandmann's family says the Washington Post defamed him for political reasons. It's unclear why the Post specifically is being targeted, since the videos of Sandmann were originally posted on social media and shared by a wide range of outlets.
Now, this isn't the first time this week libel cases have made headlines. It's all part of a troubling trend. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas earlier this week called for the High Court to reconsider a landmark libel case, New York Times versus Sullivan, which made it hard for public officials to win libel suits. In the 1964 case, the Times was sued over an ad they ran in their paper, which promoted civil rights but had some minor factual errors. To be clear, the issue was over a third-party advertisement, not a reporter's story. A white man who was not mentioned in the advertisement sued the paper for libel. The case was part of a nationwide effort to use the courts to discourage news outlets from writing about the civil rights movement. The Times v. Sullivan decision protected newspapers publishing negative but truthful stories about public figures. That protection makes it possible for reporters like us to hold our elected officials accountable. Now Justice Thomas wants to walk back that decision, arguing that states ought to decide what is and isn't libelous. The historical significance of New York Times versus Sullivan cannot be overstated. Had the court ruled in favor of Sullivan, news outlets then and now would be open to continual harassment for political gain.
Now, another very vocal opponent of libel law, President Donald Trump, who routinely bashes the news media and fake news and calls the journalists the enemy of the people. He's been complaining about libel law for decades, lamenting over what he considered unfair media coverage of himself and many of his friends.
But the term unfair doesn't enter into the equation. The Supreme Court in 1964 determined that speech can only be libelous if it demonstrates, quote, actual malice. That is to say, the intention of doing damage to a person's character. And what the president has never been able to do is prove that intent. This isn't a matter of states' rights. It's a matter of free speech and free press, both requisite for democracy.
That's all the time we have for tonight. For all of us here at Politicat, thanks for watching. Good night.